but you can just ask too, and I'll.
So and you may touch on this, but
Oh yeah.
The supervisor am looking to gain is when I am watching a lesson in a classroom, what will I be seeing that will lead me to these conversations or support this lesson or say kudos to you for doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think mostly we're really looking for student-driven approaches, and we're really looking for our candidates. Like for me, because I talk with my individual candidates about this all the time, is I'm looking to find out that you are teaching who's in the classroom now. Okay. And not off some list or let some set examples and a set curriculum. And I am going to do some shameless bragging in this presentation. If y'all want to see some literal examples, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the things my own daughter has been doing with her second graders that are just really powerful examples of really drawing children's lived experiences into the classroom and into the conversation. So, and Margaret, yes, absolutely. I can share them with you in person because I will see you. So I'm going to stop. Well, I guess I'll keep sharing this for the moment.
I feel it's sort of like that old adage about art. I don't know much about art, but I know what I like.
Yeah.
I have that sort of feeling about when we talk about cultural, however, sustaining practices. I think I know that when I see it, but I'm not sure. And I would have a very hard time speaking about it with any confidence.
Well, join me on the journey then, because I would love to talk with you more about it. And I'm going to share a book with you all that I have found has really unlocked this for me and for my students. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see, maybe I can. I'm still new to slides. Can you tell I come from elementary and I'm still getting used to doing these presentations. So welcome in everyone. I'm Rosemary Wrenn. I use she, her pronouns, and I am really grateful and honored to be joining you today. I am a university supervisor and lecturer at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I'm also the lead for the elementary education program at Cuesta Community College. So I have, I get this really awesome perspective between the two systems, plus then I'm in the elementary classrooms. And what we're really looking at in teacher preparation right now statewide is how important it is for us to all communicate. So I love that we have UC, we have CSU, we have community college, we have all different people from all different programs here today, all of us with the hope of preparing our future educators. And I'm going to share with you my understandings around culturally sustaining pedagogies. This is going to be more of me sharing out than a ton of breakout rooms. So if you have questions, just unmute and stop me or drop them in the chat, and Adria will share them with me because this is for you. This is for your time. And I want to acknowledge the land that I'm on, which is the Yaktichu Chichu Yaktilhini Northern Chumash, and they are the original, current, and future caretakers of the land and culture of the area occupied by my home and by the schools where I work. I'm in Tilini, the place of the full moon, and I gratefully acknowledge, respect, and thank the Yaktichu Chichu Yaktilhini Northern Chumash tribe of San Luis Obispo County and region, in whose homelands we're all guests. And I take this quite literally because here in San Luis Obispo, we are the homeland of the Northern Chumash, and also the site of the first National Marine Sanctuary being put forth by a tribe. And this is Chief Fred Collins, who passed away last October suddenly, and his daughter has taken over leadership. And I spoke in the last session a little bit about going beyond performative or just words for our land acknowledgements. And this is such a cool opportunity to find out what's going on in your community and to appreciate and acknowledge the ancestors that came before you in this place, and also how can we continue on their legacy. And so this is a way that I share with folks if they're interested in learning more about where we are and how we can contribute to the preservation of this community and this land and sea. This is a really awesome opportunity. It connects the Monterey and Channel Islands sanctuary, so it'll be continual and really be effective. So that's not necessarily what we're here about, but we are here about this because we're here about culturally sustaining practices. And culturally sustaining practices are those that sustain our community. And this is one way that we can help young people understand the land they're on and to start to understand the connection to these resources that we all have. And sometimes it just takes pointing it out to our teacher candidates. That's about me that you don't need to see. Okay, so what are some questions that you have about culturally sustaining practices? And we'll be checking this throughout the session, but I just want to share with you, we've got one question on there so far. You're welcome to put the Post-its. I love to have them on the Jamboard because I go back here after the workshop and see what the big questions are, even if we don't address all of them during the time that we're together. But please drop them in there or in the chat anytime, and I will come back to address them. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with some definitions. And culturally sustaining pedagogy is a term that was coined by doctors Django Paris and H. Sami Halim. And the essence of culturally sustaining pedagogy is it is here to perpetuate and foster, so to sustain the linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of schooling for positive social transformation. And Margaret was saying, so what does that look like? That looks like translanguaging. That looks like inviting our students' funds of knowledge into the classroom. It looks like respecting and inviting in however children need to show their learning. And that goes for our candidates as well. I've had a few candidates who, and several students in my undergraduate intro to teaching classes who are in this profession because they suffered as children. They did not have these things of theirs respected, and they want to change that. So we want to help them do that. And for a lot of us, I will fully confess that I got my teaching credential in 1988. It was a very different time. It was a very different focus on what the classroom was supposed to look like. And so I was not trained to teach this way. I think I had some really great learning opportunities, but I have a lot to learn still. And so the fact that things are changing, keeping up with the changes is really, really important. And that's why we have these conversations. And the authors write that it exists wherever education sustains the lifeways of communities who have been and continue to be damaged and erased through schooling. Yeah, so I'll let you sit with that one for a moment. And it is not something new. So the culturally sustaining pedagogies come out of this long line of critical reflection on what's been going on in classrooms. And Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings is the person who we credit with bringing culturally relevant pedagogy into the classroom. And that is acknowledging that there's more than one way to do something, bringing in stories and people and contributors that haven't been acknowledged in our traditional curriculum. And then Geneva Gay and Zaretta Hammond bring in this culturally responsive pedagogy. So culturally relevant means on purpose bringing in children's ways of knowing, and culturally responsive is a little less proactive in my head, at least using the semantics of these terms. But what Zaretta Hammond showed is that by doing things that connect to children's experiences, there's actual learning and actual quantitative results that come out of it. There's brain science there. And a lot of times people think, well, if we're just talking about their, their ways of knowing, that's not rigorous enough. In fact, we know for absolute fact that when we connect learning to children's ways of knowing and to their culture, to their language, their learning improves and grows. And so actually in the book on culturally sustaining pedagogy, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings actually writes an intro in there and talks about how culturally sustaining practices are a natural evolution of what she first coined back in the 90s. And then a term that I use a lot, so I'm using it here, is funds of knowledge. And that's simply how do our children know and do? How are the non-academic things that happen in their culture and in their community, how are those contributing to who they are? And how can we, again, invite those into the classroom and validate them? So I think when we're talking about as a supervisor, when we walk into a classroom and the children don't look like us or like the kids that we grew up with, and maybe they're speaking a language that we don't understand, and we have our own implicit biases that kick in right away. And so as the supervisor, what can we be doing? Because if we have those feelings, our candidates may too. What are the questions that we can be asking our students to lift up, invite in, and validate their students' ways of knowing? And an example of funds of knowledge that sticks with me, will never leave, is related to a student I had at Cuesta. And he is a son of immigrants, and he is a farm worker himself. And I was like, oh my gosh, can you share with us that experience, and really helping us to understand where our food's coming from? Even at farmer's market, I'm like, okay, yeah, I want that, that, and that. And I'm not thinking about who's picking it, who got it to the farmer, how the farmer got it to me. And so respecting that is just as valid a contribution to our community as someone who is working in an office, in a white collar job. That we need people working in the fields, we need people fixing our cars, we need people who are willing to serve us in restaurants, just as much as we need people who go to college to do what they do. So it's inviting in the ways of knowing. It's doing things like ancestor interviews, or grandparent interviews, or community interviews, getting out in the community, finding the stories, and really valuing the struggles and obstacles so many of our students and their families have gone through to get here that we often do not acknowledge. Okay, so these are some of the source documents that you might run into. Like I said, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. This is the book that was my first big dive into it. And this is a collection of essays that are fabulous. They're academic, but because they're so, they don't read like academics research, because they are written to people so that they're accessible. They're removing these barriers and these artificial hierarchies in academia, and we're talking to one another. And then this book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, for folks who are in a situation where the administration or the district is really like, well, we have to have the data, we have to have the data. This one will give you the data. Okay, so this is your argument if you are running into situations where it's like, oh, but that's just, it's just for fun. They're not really learning anything new. Well, this one will show you that, in fact, they truly are. So these are just some of the things. And then I have another huge book I'm going to share with you. So I want to share this out because you'll find that I don't use the term best practice, because if we're truly responding to the children in our classroom, there's no one way to do anything. And I get in trouble, and I have very interesting conversations with my colleagues who are very much invested in that, and that's fine. This is the way I choose to approach it. And yes, there are promising ways of doing things, but this is not a quick fix. Culturally sustaining practices involve building relationships, knowing our children, knowing how to say their names, and really starting to pay attention to who's in the classroom besides what the curriculum is telling us to do. So why do we need culturally sustaining pedagogy? I guess I should have done a trigger warning for folks. You might get mad at me by the end of this, so I'm just going to share with you. These are some of the whys. And the first is, what is normed or standardized? And quite frankly, if we look at the US educational system, it's completely normed to preserving and perpetuating the white male moneyed class and to continue to enrich that group of people. And in education, we know that in California, 60% of our teachers are white, and that's actually really a huge difference from the national average, which is about 80%. But if even in California, over 50% of our students are not white. And so that means that their ideas, their ways of knowing are not being reflected in the teachers who are up there in front of them. And what is normed or standardized also is this power dynamic. And I teach a children's lit class. And when I point out to my students in that class that they have tremendous power, that teachers have so much power over what kids read, they really hadn't thought about that before. And we are the gatekeepers. So our teacher candidates, we want them to feel that they have command of the room and their space, but also to understand that delicate balance between feeling comfortable and confident in the classroom and like you know what you're doing, but also understanding the message that you're projecting. I have been in spaces in higher education lately where I work with people who I am their worst nightmare. Because when they were growing up throughout school, they had teachers who looked like me, who penalized them, who wouldn't let them speak their language, who sent them to detention for doing the same thing a white kid was doing. So we need to understand from a very early age, and I wish that I had had that interaction 40 years ago so that I could have brought that through my whole practice. I can't undo what I've done, right? So what I can do is move forward. And so really asking our candidates, why do you think that, like, why is there such a high value placed on kids sitting quietly? Think about that. Let's think about that. Who is that for? That's for the teacher. I mean, I know I've been there. I've been the one to say, gosh, there's no kids today. I'm getting so much done. Yeah, but when it's learning that needs to happen, let's think about that. We have such a deficit vocabulary lately, and especially after the forced move online. And I see someone has a hand up. I can't see it because of the bar. Whose name is that?
Sheila.
Sheila, jump right in, interrupt, go for it.
I don't want to interrupt, but you know, they call people like us renegades, right? But here's my question, and it may not be able, I wonder if anyone else struggles with it. I'm looking at the list of terminology. And yet every school I've been to is, oh, we're so behind. Oh, there's such a learning loss. And then, yeah, thank you. I just finally let the COVID gray go in because it's like, and yet we return to the classroom after 2 years and 3 weeks are spent on standardized testing, whatever the heck that means. I am crazy. Well, I'm always, I mean, the inequity of that and the impact it's going to have on our teachers and retaining student teachers, because it seems to me that there were nothing was changed from 29, or we didn't get into it, from 2019 until 2022 and that. So
you open the door for one of my favorite anecdotes. So in all that horribleness, one of the amazing things that happened is we had access to scholars in a way we never had before. And so I was doing a seminar sitting on my couch on a Sunday morning in my PJs talking to Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. Okay, and I was like, I was starstruck. But one of the things she said, and she said it several times throughout the pandemic shutdown, was everybody wants to go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. why do we want to all go back there? And we look at Dr. Bettina Love also addresses that fact. We had this chance, y'all, in those 2 years to really think about what was working, what wasn't working for our children. And what do? We go right back and they're coloring in bubbles in 2nd grade, reading 3 pages of single-spaced nonfiction writing. Okay. And so looking at that, dang it, we blew it. We really had an opportunity to really upset the apple cart, but we can still infuse this stuff and yes, cause a fair amount of good trouble, I think. Helena.
I remember when I was still teaching, I had admin from the very first meeting in August till the absolute last meeting in June, July, whatever. And all they talked about were test scores. So here, my brand new baby teachers, I'm sure they're having to go sit in ridiculous faculty meetings where they have admins that are exactly the same, putting up all of their scores on the board and comparing their school scores with this one's scores, with this one's scores. I remember that was it with my admin, and he would put up, I don't know, 4 different school scores and how we compared with this other school. But every blessed meeting that we had, that's what he talked about.
Well, do you know, if you teach this way, those scores are going to go up. If you, and people, I'm not kidding. I mean, we know that when children are in a space where the learning is meaningful, that they will learn better and they will do better on those exams if we are paying attention to them. That's a hard sell because people perceive this as, I will not use the word rigor, but they perceive this as less challenging and less engaging. And in fact, when we as we see, as I'll get into some of the components here, when we ask children to connect their lived experience with the content, when we bring in content that relates to them, they're a whole lot more likely, and it's been shown that they will be more likely to stay engaged and listen. So even when it comes up to the stuff they don't really care as much about, they're turned on, their learning is activated because they feel valued. They know that they matter. That's the other thing. If you read all of Bettina Love's work, if you come around, all you got to do is come out of there, not all, but the key thing I cannot stop thinking about is make students matter. If you're a person, I'm a person who always felt like I mattered and showed up in school. School was easy for me. I didn't question that. That is not everybody's experience. And when you show up at school and you're told that your community is ignorant because they don't speak English, or is illegal, or all your group of people could ever do is be victimized, why would you want to stick around? Why would you care what that person is talking about? Okay. But if you are in a space where there are high expectations for your success, where the teacher can say your name or at least tries, where your stories and your grandma and your grandpa's stories come into the classroom and are valued and venerated, then school is a place where you want to be. And then if school is a place you want to be, you actually will do better on the exams. Okay. And I think the other criminal thing that we've been saying in front of, around, and all over the place is this learning loss. I think any kid that survived these last 3 years is to be commended. And she's in the house right now, and so she knows I'm going to talk about her. But my daughter joined Teach for America in 2019, and her first year was the online year. So it was heck in a handbasket. And we talked a lot during that year. And then last year was her first full year in person. And we talked a lot about how important it was to put the academics over here and to really figure out what these kids needed. They're traumatized. We're all traumatized. So, and someone coming in here will go, oh my gosh, this is also touchy-feely. Well, think about it. When you are feeling threatened or you are mourning the loss of someone in your family, and all you hear about is how dangerous it is to go to school, and all you see are grown-ups yelling at one another, why are we testing kids right now? So anyway, these are some of the reasons that we're looking at culturally sustaining pedagogies and these deficit attitudes about folks that don't fit the paradigm of what US education has been, which has basically been a very effective tool for excluding rather than for inviting in. I don't know about you, but these are some of the things that I grew up on. And again, not seeing, we have young people, we want kids to learn to read, something that is not a natural thing whatsoever. And yet we present one, most of our books still are representing white characters, and you're much more likely, you're twice as likely to see a truck or a bunny as a main character as you are to see a Latinx, Black, Indigenous, Asian American. And I'm not making that up. There's numbers. I don't have it on this handout, but I can find it for you. So one of the resources linked in this talk is a book list from the course that I teach that started as a off my syllabus from children's literature in a diverse society. And so one thing that our candidates do a lot of, especially in the early days, at least for me, is they get to read picture books to the class. So why not pick some picture books that represent different ways of knowing and being, that represent bilingual characters. And so we have, we have history books talking about slavery as a trade deal, and that these that Black people came here to become workers, and that narrative continues to be perpetuated. And again, I'm not, this talk isn't even about the whole conflict campaign and all the book banning threats that are going on, but this is really dangerous because it's taking us back to a really closed place. And probably the most dangerous thing is an educated person. So I guess that's why we, and it threatens the power structure as it is. But these are, we have these reading lists that are full of really important authors, but we need to start looking at, we're not saying that you can't read any of these books, but what about looking for some books that represent other ways of other experiences? And we're not saying that they're easy. If anything, they're more complex, especially if our lived experience is different from the one we're reading about in the book. But the language in the literature is just as rich and engaging. I was so good at this. I don't know how many of you in your teacher preparation were taught, we don't talk about color, we don't talk about race. Okay, and if we do, we whisper. Bottom line, if we don't talk about it or we say we don't see color, we're literally telling kids we don't see them. And so this has been, for me, a big one to work on. It happens to be what drove my dissertation. And so I think a lot about it now. But we have, and both these terms, colorblind and color mute, are very much ableist terms. I'm using them because those are the terms that the scholars chose. And at the time, we've evolved. But basically, if we say we're not seeing it and we're not talking about it, then we're not engaging with it and unpacking it. And so that's one of the reasons we really need to be thinking more about these practices. Is it Uzma?
Yes, it's Rosemary. Thank you. I just wanted to share that, thank you for talking about this. Even as I first came to States back in early 90s as an international student, I felt like I was invisible because even in university, sometimes, when you spoke and you said something or whatever, it felt like nobody either saw me or heard me. So it was quite quite an eye-opener coming from a different country initially. And granted, I was fortunate that I grew up where I grew up, you know, speaking English the way I do and all that. I could see a lot of things happening with other international students. And I think that's what got me so interested in diversity more and more and more over the years. But thank you for talking about this, you know. Thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing your experience. And I think that it's important for us to realize that for all the folks who speak up to share that, there are multitudes who, because they get ignored or discounted, their experience is discounted, they stop speaking up. And we wonder why kids stop showing up to school. Well, why would you show up to a place that has made it very clear to you you don't belong, or where your way of knowing isn't valued? Okay, so this is something that I think we've it's really interesting. Well, I think it's interesting, personal, but I started my dissertation in 2019. 2020 is when I started doing the work on it. And I chose my question before lockdown and before the summer, with all of the demonstrations and all of the increased awareness and willingness to talk about race, right? And my question was, how do white women teachers navigate race in the classroom? Something like that, right? And I anticipated I was going to find people who didn't even want to say the words, right? And so because of that summer of activism and just like people engaging in these conversations, it was a very different conversation. And you would think that now, 2 years later, that these would be far more accepted things that we'd be talking about, but unfortunately they're not. And it still takes us intentionally engaging in these conversations. And so this is the one, I don't know how many of you have heard this one. Oh, they're too young. Babies don't notice race. We know that babies as young as 3 months do recognize skin color. And so it's really important for our teacher candidates to be able to have intelligent conversations about race and to, at very least, avoid perpetuating stereotypes, because kids are always watching us and they are picking up on the terms that we use. And much of it is really hard to erase from our vocabulary. We were raised in this water that is full of it. And so I invite you to engage in learning in whatever way works for you. There was an article back during 2020 that was like, when Black people are in pain, white people join book clubs. And I took that to heart, because I have to say that book clubs is one way that I learned a lot of this, but you got to go beyond the book club. Okay, and we have tremendous influence on the future, y'all, because these, even if you have 1 or 2 candidates a year, which I do because I have other stuff going on, those 1 or 2 candidates are going to impact 30 to 60 to maybe 100 kids a year. And any of you all old enough to remember the Herbal Essence commercial, that's what I think of. And they tell 2 friends, and so on and so on and so on. So we have, even if you only have 1 candidate a quarter, that 1 candidate has the potential to impact children for generations. So this is a very useful resource, because for those folks who want their the receipts, this references the studies, and this is in the resources for this workshop. Another reason that we absolutely must engage with culturally sustaining practices is because we've left out a lot of stories. I have students in college who had never learned about Japanese internment camps, Indian boarding schools, or what was really going on in the missions. And these students were raised in California. So we need to bring in these stories. We need to tell the whole story. My students are so angry. And these are college students. And they're like, why didn't someone tell me this? And I'm like, I don't know. And my thing with the Indian boarding schools, it blows me away. I'm like, what other schools had cemeteries? You know, I mean, that was literally an effort at extinction, because if they could get rid of the children, that was the idea, was that was going to stop. So, Margaret.
To your point about having students who have never heard or who've heard very little about these very important and shameful historical events. I was working with a teacher a few years ago. He was not one of my candidates. I was in the classroom for some other purpose, but it was Indigenous People Day, or Christopher Columbus, October, first week of October. And he had 5th and 6th graders, and he was really surprised that none of them knew anything at all about Christopher Columbus. And then he had something queued up that was more of the actual story and the horror and everything. But what I was explaining to him is that from the time those students were in kindergarten, the teachers were hearing, whoa, we've got this story about Christopher Columbus wrong. So we weren't saying anything as teachers. Mm. So I think maybe some of your students are in that same error, where teachers knew that we couldn't just paint a picture of, you know, like California missions as being this great opportunity, or the Indian boarding school. So we didn't say anything at all. Kind of like in kind of like color muteness, only historical muteness.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really common response. I'm glad you brought that up, Margaret, because it's really a common response to, well, I'm just not going to talk about it then, because that means I don't have to engage in the learning, and I don't have to engage in the self-reflection that it takes to do something about it. And in fact, it was really interesting in my research and talking with with teachers. I had a teacher who was a 2nd grade teacher, revered in our community, and was unaware that the Thanksgiving mythology was so problematic. And she had parents come to her and talk to her about this. And she was like, I just didn't know what to do. I just thought maybe I shouldn't do anything about Thanksgiving, because that's a really common response, because we have an emotional attachment to that. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard when you get emotion involved in these things to separate. So it's really easier to just say, oh, I'm just not going to talk about it. And that I'm not dissing anybody who's done that, because I've done it too. But it's when we start to be aware of these behaviors, then we can be aware of when we do them, and to critically engage instead when possible, or to just say, I didn't know that, we should go find out more about it. But yeah, I mean, I remember my learning about missions was very much romantic. And that is one where you get into a lot of really intense debate with people, because again, you're dealing with faith in a lot of situations, and you're dealing, like, faith is not something you want to mess with. But there's also the facts, and Violet, who is Fred's daughter, she said, yeah, when they were talking about the statues all coming down that summer, she says, yeah, well, there's no statues to my ancestors, and nobody talks about them till they dig up the street to do the street work, because we have the mission downtown in San Luis Obispo. And she's like, my ancestors were walking over them and driving over them every single day. So yeah, sorry, Helena, I kept going and I saw your hand. Sorry about that.
I was just going to say, when I first started teaching, I started in middle school, and I would be teaching U.S. history. And I could not figure out, how is it that the kids don't know blah, 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 blah. Whatever was the same. How could they not know this? And I didn't get it. why didn't they understand blah, blah, whatever was the subject. When I went down to elementary school, then all of a sudden, click, the light bulb was huge. Because with a lot of the kids, either, like you said, it's not talked about at all, because depending on who the militant parents are,
Right.
I believe XYZ, and I don't want my child hearing it, so therefore no child should hear it.
Well, and that gets into a whole nother thing about about who gets to choose, and that could be a whole nother conversation.
And when I had a principal and another lady and I would buddy up, and we were only allowed to have social studies on Friday afternoon from 2:25 until like 2:40, whatever it is, because the kids were not tested on social studies until whatever was the grade. They were tested on language arts and math. So that is what we were supposed to be teaching. And my principal figured that it was a waste of kids' time. We were wasting their time by doing social studies or science. And I did not get that at all when I was still teaching middle school. It never dawned on me that that was anywhere a possibility that kids would not have learned anything about science and social studies until I went down to elementary, and it's like, oh, no wonder.
Well, and one thing that we can do, and one thing that the scholar that I'm going to share with you in just a moment really is a huge advocate of, is given those constraints of not having scheduled time for social studies and science, what are some other ways we can bring those stories into the classroom? And one of them is literally through books, but there are a lot of different ways that we can bring in those concepts without having a dedicated, this is social studies time. And I want to keep going, because there's some key points I wanted to share with you that you might find useful, but I also saw Sheila's comment about the mission project. There is a whole alternative for missions curriculum that's been recently written and is available that gives a more critical view. And critical meaning inquiring, not like everything about it is bad, but a critical understanding of the missions and what really was involved in all of them. And I don't have that here, but I'll find it and add it to our resources. But Dr. Janelle Navarro at Poly SLO is one of the people who contributed to that. So yeah, it's like I said, you think people are talking about and changing these things, but they're not, because it's not incentivized, and who's got the time, right? So we can start with our teachers before they hit the classroom. And if they go in with these ideas and understandings, then we can really start seeing a difference for our kids. The consequences, I would go into these in more detail. And if you have questions, I'm happy to clarify and share with you the resources on that. But I want to get into how. What are some of the ways that we build these practices? And I'm sharing with you because this is not my work. This is Lorena Herman. She's a brilliant scholar. All of these links will take you to different things that she's done. And she's written a book called Textured Teaching. And what are her bona fides? Well, she happens to be a Dominican immigrant, and that comes up a lot in her presentations. She's wonderful to listen to learn with. She's really, really gracious and generous. We're hoping to get her to speak at Cal Poly in the fall, and she's going to be at Cuesta for our Banned Books Week. But Lorena was in the cohort with Dr. Paris and Dr. Alim when they were building this concept of culturally sustaining pedagogy. And what I love about her, many things I love about her, but one of them is that she has come up with what she calls textured teaching. And this is a link to the book. It is something that I have been using in my introduction to teaching classes now to help my students understand culturally sustaining pedagogies. And this is it. She's, like I said, she's in a nutshell, she has given us a framework that we can use as we consider how we're teaching. So in the center here is culturally sustaining pedagogy. Sorry about that. Culturally sustaining pedagogies. And it's based on these 3 values: truth and knowledge, justice, love, and community. So these are the values upon which it's built. And I think earlier today we had a conversation about supervising and really looking at Dr. Goldie Mohammed's framework. And I think this fits really well alongside and into that too, is if we come from these foundations, are we incorporating truth and knowledge? Are we incorporating justice, love, and community into our lesson planning? Then what comes out of that is going to lead to nurturing our students. And then the traits of textured teaching, which is culturally sustaining pedagogies, are these 4 main things. Are we student-driven and community-centered? They're interdisciplinary, they're experiential, and they're flexible. And I'm not going to go deep in each one of these, but I thought was really fascinating to me in talking with Lorena was she distinguishes between student-driven and student-centered. And she's really encouraging us to step back as the teacher and really figure out what's going on for our students, what matters to them, and to build our curriculum off of that. And you're like, that is not sustainable. You're talking about sustaining pedagogy. I can't do that because that takes so much time. If this is our goal and we are trying and we are really looking at the kids in our class, what are they into? And how can I bring that in as the hook that gets them engaged so they want to stay in here the rest of the lesson? And then also looking at the community. We're focusing on relationships. We all heard this earlier today. You know, student voice is central, and we're responding to the community and current events. When I had kids, I stopped watching the evening news because I didn't want them to hear it, right? Well, that was fine, but they're hearing it everywhere else, okay? So if we have this habit of not talking about stuff, but the kids are talking. And so what better space for them to talk than with an adult who cares about them and who's building community. Textured teaching is interdisciplinary. And so to address what Helena was saying about not having time for all the subjects, how can we bring social studies and history and math, you get math, but how do you bring literature into math? Bragging. My daughter did for Black History Month. They focused on the book Show Way, which is talking about how the enslaved women created quilts that were maps for the Underground Railroad. And then they went on to talk about geometry, and the kids made their own quilts out of paper and then with needle and thread. Yes, 2nd graders. So there's ways to do it and still meet the curricular standards. And then when children are assessed on our state tests, they have this connection that's a real connection rather than just something that someone told them that they had to practice with the pencil and paper. You have to do both. But if we introduce it and we sustain it with their ways of knowing, they're going to have more access to it. It's experiential. And I don't know, I did a lot of teaching of writing when I was in elementary school, and 5 senses. You know, how can we make this an experience for people? And again, our candidates are in someone else's classroom and who may have very big concerns about managing behavior. So it doesn't have to be something where you're making a mess, but we can have children close their eyes and imagine. Or maybe we bring in something that smells good, you know, and that they can connect to the learning. So, but we know that when children are engaged in this way, they will be more engaged. And then finally, it's flexible. And so when people say they're getting through the curriculum, I picture myself dragging children across the classroom and the kicking and screaming. It's like, I have to get through. What about if we flip that around and say, what do they need to learn? Oh, they didn't quite understand the whole thing about this math concept, but I have to be on the next page tomorrow. well, maybe it would be worth investing a little bit more in learning what they need to know today, so that when you do move on to the next thing, they really get it. And again, looking at different ways of presenting the information. We've talked a lot about UDL today too. That's where we come into this. So I want to show you some culturally sustaining pedagogy. And this is my daughter, Miss Becca, and these are her kids. What children do you know who know how to tell time on an analog clock anymore? I don't. So in math, they were learning about telling time, and they said, Miss Becca, we want to make a clock. And so they went out on the playground and made a clock with their bodies, and were telling each other what time it should be. So is this an efficient use of time? Somebody might say no. Why are kids out on the playground in the middle of the day? And instead looking at what are they learning? Are these kids going to be able to look at an analog clock and literally embody it? I mean, they have all the numbers around here, and they're practicing telling time. I have college students who can't read a clock like this. So this is culturally sustaining. She took their ideas. It's experiential. It is, it's rigorous because they're having to think and critically analyze who's going to lie where, which notch am I going to be pointing to? This is something that they did during they were honoring Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And this is an example of inviting children's language into the classroom and acknowledging and celebrating the dual language. She happens to have a lot of Spanish speakers in her class. And so this is a bilingual book that they wrote. We were talking about doing a mural because that's a very much a activist, Chicano activist approach to protesting, but there wasn't a space for a mural. I still think that would be a fun thing. So they did the book instead, and then also validated her children as artists and writers by having it published in this little book. This I stole from a classroom I was in. So there's a book called The Best Part of Me, and it is a trade book, and it's little children took pictures of their favorite body part and wrote about it. Okay, so this is so monstrously validating for young people. And it's also argumentative writing, which I know is a standard, right? So they can write a sentence frame, or they can write about themselves. And so you don't have to turn it into a book. When I saw this, it was up on the classroom wall. But this book is just priceless. And to see what the kids wrote about themselves. And again, we're validating their lived experience and their way of knowing. And I don't know if y'all can see it too well, but this is a Mother's Day card where she's written in both English and in Spanish. And that's just the norm. And we call that translanguaging, and looking at really inviting kids into the conversation in that way, and respecting their parents in that way, and acknowledging that importance. So that is me like yabbering at you the whole way through. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of space in here for breakouts. Yes, and I will be sharing the slides with everyone, and I'm happy to engage in conversations. But just so you know, like one of the things I will do with my candidates is I'll just ask them what they know about their kids. What do they like to do? And help them, you ask as many questions as we can. And then also just kind of provide some resources and information along the way. Something I've done with my candidates in the past is offer kind of like a little mini check-in weekly. That is something that my first, we called her master teachers at that time, did with me. And every week she sat down with me and gave me basically a whole lesson. She was one of the folks, she was a speaker for Madeline Hunter at the time. And she would sit down with me and we would talk about differentiating instruction and really helping children to connect to the learning, different labels, different approaches. But that was foundational for me. And our candidates we have a lot to offer them, even if it's just us both asking questions and working through it together. Uzma.
I'd say one more thing is to listen to them, to really try and just listen, and then make mental notes if possible, and then check in with those things the next day. That really helps build those relationships with them. The more you listen, the more you understand what they are feeling, where they are coming from, what are their thoughts, their ideas, all that,
Exactly. I mean, we should be modeling that with our candidates, and then to help them see how they can do it with their students. These are just some more thoughts on it. One of the things about something for all of us to do, and for those of us who think of ourselves as scholars and that we know what we're talking about, it's hard, but to stop and dig in and try to figure out where we're coming from and what our understandings are and where our holes are, and to just be willing to continue to learn. So, and then also I think words matter a lot. And so I use engage children instead of manage children, because we want really the kids to be learning about how they work for themselves. This slide, and the slides are in the folder already. These have links to resources like crazy. Liz Kleinrock's Start Here, Start Now is a great book with like activities you can do. Like you could do these with your candidate, things like identity maps, talking about positionality. Tribes has been around since I started teaching. It's now through Peace Learning Center. Community circles just should be a part of everything. And again, I'm happy to chat with you more about that. And then a couple liberating structures are some fun ways of doing group learning. Learning for Justice is what used to be called Teaching Tolerance, and that it's an incredibly rich resource. Awesome. Adria said she used Tribes in New York. It works. That's why it's still around. Learning for Justice has an incredibly rich resources. And We Need Diverse Books is a site that's just got great book recommendations. And this is the list I was talking about with authors and characters of different identities. For folks in STEM, I often get, oh, but I'm in STEM. We're different. It's easy to do this in history and English, but I'm in STEM. Well, here are a few articles to get you thinking about how you can bring these practices into STEM. So I'm going to be quiet now because I did literally talk that whole time. I'm so sorry. But there is a little debrief session after this. And I don't know, Adria, do you have the link? Oh, cool. Yeah, so if you are able to join us at 3 for a little debrief, we'd love to have you there. And I just, this is my link, this one of my many emails, and also the resource file. That's a link to the resource file, but all of it is in there. If you want other ideas, this is the tip of the iceberg. And then I want to leave you with this. One of my other Paulo Freire quotes that's one of my favorites is that whoever teaches learns in the act of teaching, and whoever learns teaches in the act of learning. And looking at education through this current lens of mine is very humbling. And I certainly would like to say that these are my opinions and my ways of saying, and I'm all about removing barriers and getting rid of stratifications in education. So if I was a little flip here and there, I apologize if I offended anybody, but I'd love to have a conversation and hope that y'all will join in the debrief.